Rion Frequency, where truth cuts deep, growth hits different, and culture leads the conversation. Hosted by Rion, this is the come up for the culture.
I want to speak about black excellence. The fact that my brown skin feels heaven sent. When the wind blows, I feel the touch of heaven's breath. You brainwash your intelligence is evident. Evidence we built some pyramids they claim it's aliens. Melanin skin absorbs the light inside you radiant. Elevate your conscience, stuck inside the office. Employee of the month, they won't even put that in your coffin. Let's talk about the profit, the margins of spilled your bonnet. Drinking water from your faucet, just to give you droplets. But you in the club, it's popping. Penny, that's the option. Pictures that you prompted, but forget it cause you locked in. Living in the moment. Ryan said it's token, if you black, poor, you broken. Black excellence, when they spill our blood, it's golden. The third eye, the karmic gates is open, but death is better than bondage. Yeah, that's the option. Stay cautious, stay dangerous. You don't need no accolades, nigga, you famous. Stay dangerous.
What's up, world? You are now tapped into the Rion Frequency, and this is where thoughts meet elevation so that we remember who we are. And I am your host, Rion. A few announcements before we jump right into today's topic is I've been working on the website. As promised, I told you it was going to be a little late into August and possibly into September just because of the nature of me being a perfectionist. But I did get the domain. I've got the email, not the website, but the email set up, and it is Rion@therionfrequency.com. Therionfrequency.com is coming soon. I'm hoping to have it rolled out by the next episode, but just bear with me because I got a lot of things going on, especially now that my children is back in school. So the schedule has gotten much tighter. But I am starting a segment that is dedicated to supporting black businesses and giving black businesses visibility. So please do shoot me an email, or your with your IG, your website, whatever it is that you got, whatever it is that you sell, whatever product, service, whatever it is. I want to tap in and showcase it on the show, and I want to spend my money with you. Like, above anything else, that's what I want to do. I want to make sure that black dollars get circulated with other black folks. So if you're a service as well, just make sure that you tap in, because you never know who's listening and who may need it. That's a large part of what I want for the show. I don't just want it to be a podcast. I do want it to be a community, and I do want to inspire other people to ensure that we're uplifting black community. And there's obviously a lot of things that I want for the show, and I'm hoping to get those things rolled out. But right now, we're going to get into episode 7. So last week, we talked about black sustainability and how it is met with white rage and the consequences of white rage. And over the weekend, my wife and I, we decided to just chill at the crib and just do nothing. And she put on the Hulu documentary on Hurricane Katrina. And if you haven't watched it, I implore you to take a few hours and just watch it, especially if you were like me and just very ignorant to the situation. I'm almost embarrassed to say this was a subject that I have very little knowledge on. I was in high school at the time, so I was just far less enlightened, and I really didn't care about what was going on outside of me. And I remember the news articles. I remember discussing certain things that came from certain sources, and I just believed that everything that I read or saw was true at the time. And over the years, obviously the truth has been revealed, but honestly, I feel like we just not mad enough. We haven't fully dissected how white supremacy is still using the same playbook to make these power moves, and we got to wake the fuck up. We have to mobilize. We have to create a tidal wave of havoc so that these issues are no longer in our communities. When Kanye West said George Bush doesn't care about black people, white folks clutch their pearls. The truth was profanity in church. Bro was cussing at Jesus Christ himself. And New Orleans knew. Like, the world didn't know. Like, nobody knew. Like, New Orleans knew, but, nobody else really knew what the hell was going on. Katrina wasn't just wind and water. There's been plenty of hurricanes. That's not what Katrina was. It was not a tropical storm or just a hurricane. It was policy, it was design and neglect stacked on black people's back. And 20 years later, being enlightened to more truth, or the truth, I should say, not even necessarily more truth, but the truth, and not knowing it tells the same story, which is profit over people. And this is the humming of the AI data centers that they're pulling the power from the South like it's a buffet. It's a different storm, but it's the same playbook. So in today's episode, we're diving into environmental racism, the cataclysmic failures of policy, and it's appropriately titled George Bush and them don't care about black people. Obviously, this is not titled after the president, but it's just really to make a point that Kanye West was labeled as a psycho after he said what he said on national television. That
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
And it's true. George Bush, honestly, the entire structure doesn't matter. Left wing, right wing, I don't care. I'm not saying that there are not politicians actually out here doing the work, but I'm just saying as a whole, they don't give a fuck. They don't give a fuck about the indigenous. They don't give a fuck about black people. They don't give a fuck about immigrants. They don't give a fuck about anybody, really. Their only job is to uphold white supremacy and capitalism. Katrina didn't just overtop a wall. It tore the mask off of an entire system. The independent teams and Army Corps, their own postmortems, their own dead folks, found dozens of major breaches, that weren't random at all. That they were from. It wasn't just overtopping and erosion in places. This was a flawed flood wall design that should have never been passed. I dug a little bit deeper into Katrina as far as it relates to policy, and some things that I didn't know was that after 9/11, FEMA got folded into the Department of Homeland Security. So this is just more bureaucracy, more bullshit, and also an unnecessary focus on terrorism and other like scenarios. So in the case of Katrina, not only was FEMA slow, but they were focused on the wrong shit the entire time. In the documentary, they talked a lot about law, order, maintaining order, maintaining, like a peaceful situation. Like they were at war. You can't be at war with your own people. You can't deploy the National Guard to go assist people, to go help, and feel like you're going into battle. FEMA was focused on the wrong shit. DHS was focused on the wrong shit. The government as a whole has just been focused on the wrong shit. And honestly, like we'll get to all of that momentarily. Just rock with me. So, if you haven't been asleep at the wheel, then you know that 9/11 was an inside job. And if you know the history of the Bushes, then you know why, Junior had to crash a few planes on U.S. soil, spark some fear, and indemnify Daddy Senior. And we can dive into that another day, but today we going to focus on really just how W handled Katrina. A Cat 5 scale coastal disaster was literally a textbook threat for New Orleans. So why was it not treated with any kind of urgency? Why was it not treated as an actual threat? Why was it not taken seriously? A year prior, academics and government officials were made privy to the effects of a storm like Katrina with an exercise called PAM. And armed and equipped with that knowledge, you would think that they would start to take preventative measures, that they would start to take the threat seriously. But even with that knowledge, they just ignored it. Because yes, denial is real, but what's worse than that is that they knew that the PAM exercise could become real. But who does it affect? In 1965, there was a hurricane named Hurricane Betsy. It overwhelmed New Orleans in a very similar way that Katrina did. And Congress responded with the Flood Control Act of 1965 and Lake Pontchartrain Vicinity Project. Walls, gates, levees. They promised to handle a typical Category 3 storm. But the project just dragged on for decades. Mismanaged funds, always putting things off to the back burner. Again, who is affected? If these fail, if the levees fail, if the gates fail, who is affected? Who lives there? These were all critical choices that set the city up for failure, because poor black folks in America don't mean shit. There weren't a lot of statistics that I could find when I was researching for this particular episode, but prior to Katrina, 1 in 4 people lived below the poverty line. For a single person, that would be $9,000 a year in 2005. I need y'all to hear me on this, okay? So for a family of 4, that would be $19,000 a year. And 1 in 4 people lived beneath that threshold. So not only was it black folks, it was a lot of disabled folks as well, old folks, living on less than $19,000 a year. The lower Ninth Ward was comprised of 82% black residents, compared to the city of New Orleans, which sits at about 54%. By definition, environmental racism is policy and practice, decisions that disproportionately harm black, indigenous, and other marginalized communities. Dr. Benjamin Chavez coined the term as we use it today, environmental racism. Then the state and city governments took very little action on the information that they were provided. Investigators later flagged eyewall floodwalls, including in the 17th Street Canal, as fundamentally vulnerable. A 1978 full-scale test had already warned, 1978, y'all, had already warned of this, tipping failure mode. The warnings were not acted on because who is affected? When Katrina came, the wall was going to fail at 8 to 9 feet of water. That's not nature. That's just negligence. South Louisiana has lost about 1,800 square miles of wetland since 1932. Okay, that is the living buffer that blunts the storm surge. So when there are hurricanes, there's something called the storm surge, and I'm just learning about this because I recently brought my happy ass down to Florida, and I don't know why, but I'm here. And I didn't know much about hurricanes, because coming from where I hail from, the Rocky Mountain state, we don't have hurricanes. So I didn't really understand or know what a storm surge was. But living here, I've learned quite a bit about the storm surge. So if you live in an area where, and you're not familiar with hurricanes, a storm surge is basically the water levels, how high when they reach land. So just think of it like a big ass wall of water just approaching the shore. The living buffer that blunts that storm surge, the oil and gas companies carved them out to build gas canals, and they started to levee the Mississippi River. The MRGO shipping channel that is in New Orleans, it's sliced and basically just staved off the entire coast. Locals called the MRGO the Hurricane Surge Superhighway. When marshes chainsawed into open water, your city essentially just becomes a bowl. And we like to believe that there will be justice in some capacity. So this year, a jury ordered Chevron to pay $744 million for wetland destruction in Plaquemines Parish, because those wetlands, they are the protective infrastructure, or were the protective infrastructure. They destroyed the shield, and now they pay the price. But in the case of Katrina, the communities paid the price first, and then they just got to deal with the consequences of it on the back end. The courts and the reports, they wrestled with MRGO's role. One trial found that the corp's mismanagement worsened flooding, but later reversed it on sovereign immunity grounds. The policy choices still stand, which is that we built and maintained a shortcut that magnified the surge while the wetlands continued to vanish. So the perfect storm was brewing long before Katrina ever began to bolt towards the coast. But again, who is being affected? Who's there? In 2005, the FEMA leadership and funding had their priorities drifted off just a bit. And the Government of Accountability Organization, or the GOA, You can think of them as like the watchdogs, you know. They flagged the DHS tilt toward anti-terror grants. And Katrina revealed that making those decisions, it only just delayed mobilization. There was very poor coordination by the government, and it just left chaos. It ensued all over the Superdome and the lower ninth. They were left as symbols of abandonment because this wasn't a natural disaster. Katrina itself, the rain, the hurricane, the storm surge is a natural disaster. But what happened that followed this natural disaster, that was a government failure. George Bush and them. So when we say George Bush and them don't care, we are not reciting a fucking meme. We are reading footnotes. So now that we got that out of the way, like, we can't talk about George Bush's presidency and Katrina without Michael Brown. You know, Brownie, the man that Bush told on live TV that he was doing a hell of a job. Michael Brown. Here's the problem. All right. By the time George Bush said that on September 2nd, thousands of people were still stranded. Okay. They were on rooftops. You know, they were at the Superdome. They were on the fucking overpass, the highway. They had been without food, clean drinking water. And I need y'all to understand, this is Louisiana. I don't know if you've ever been to the South in August into September, but it's not like anywhere else in the fucking world. It is hot as shit still. Like fucking 100 degrees. The humidity is at an all-time high. You are sweating balls all day long. Okay? These people have been without food, clean water, medicine for the elderly and disabled. Families were waving sheets and cardboard signs on top of roofs that read, "Help us." This was 4 fucking days. 4 days later. But Michael Brown was doing a hell of a job. Michael Brown, we always have to talk about the decisions of our presidents and the competency. You know, like when we get to talking about DEI, all the buzzwords today that people like to fucking be upset about. Everybody wants to talk about merit. But I need y'all to understand, Michael Brown wasn't some hardened emergency responder. He was a former commissioner of intelligence for an Arabian Horse Association. That's not a joke. Like, that's on his actual resume. His disaster management experience before FEMA was slim to none. And you could tell because it showed. The emails that were obtained later revealed that Michael Brown was too busy worried about his outfit for TV appearances and asking his aides to roll out more time before press briefings. This is while elderly residents drowned in their attics and children went missing in the chaos. The same people that were deployed there to protect, to serve the people, were raping and victimizing them. I don't think we're mad enough. The federal chain of command was paralyzed. You know, requests from Louisiana's governor and New Orleans mayor for troops, supplies, transport, they all got tangled in these jurisdiction type of disputes. Again, more bureaucracy. Brown claimed that the military didn't give him the support that he needed, which was bullshit. And then the Pentagon claimed that FEMA didn't make clear requests. Meanwhile, every hour lost was another life that was lost because they just couldn't make fucking decisions. Bush's own actions did not help. On August 29th, the very day that Katrina made landfall, he was in Arizona joking with John McCain about eating birthday cake. And it took him 2 full days to cut his fucking vacation short and even address the crisis in person. And when he did, he flew overhead while the residents of New Orleans looked up into the sky to see a fucking enormous plane. And he's just looking out the window. This is why Kanye West's words, this is why they hit so hard. George Bush doesn't care about black people. That wasn't a performance. It was a live news intervention. For the millions of people that were watching, it summed up exactly what the fuck they felt. The president wasn't feeling our urgency because he didn't share what was at stake for all of us. The numbers, they back it up. You know, the neighborhoods that were hit the hardest was the lower Ninth Ward, New Orleans East, parts of Saint Bernard Parish. These were overwhelmingly black working class neighborhoods. A lot of them lived in poverty or close to the lines of poverty. Those areas got slower rescues, you know, fewer resources, and harsher policing when the National Guard finally did arrive. Instead of the relief first mentality, residents were met with just checkpoints and curfews and media criminalizing survivors as looters for taking bread and diapers from ruined stores. 4 days with no food, no water. There were children, infants, and they were met with martial law. I can't even begin to tell you like how angry I was just sitting there listening to this and watching it. Beyond fucking frustrated. By the time Bush had officially fired Michael Brown on September 12th, the damage wasn't just physical. The trust was gone. For many, it cemented the idea that we have always let kind of just fester in the back of our minds, is that black lives are expendable in federal disaster planning. They don't give a fuck. So when you hear me say like George Bush and them don't care about black people, that's not hyperbole. That's documented indifference. The same policies that delayed rescue in 2005 are the same patterns we see when black communities fight for clean water, safe housing, or relief from climate disasters today. I need this to sink in for everybody. When it comes down to, you know, environmental racism, I need you to fucking feel the rage burning of what the survivors of Katrina had to go through. 5 days. 5 days of heat, hunger, dehydration, fear. Instead of sending help, America sent judgment. Because I remember the infamous headlines. The Associated Press, August 30th, 2005. And I'll pull it up for you guys right here. But over a photo of a young man, a young black man at that, a young man walks through chest-deep flood water after looting a grocery store in New Orleans. The same day, same wire service, but this time it was a photo that shows a white couple waiting with food. 2 residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. Looting versus finding. One word criminalizes, the other one humanizes. Same survival act. It's just a different race. It's not coincidental, because that's how American media has been framing the suffrage of black people since before there were even fucking cameras. Y'all could look at this clip. The lower Ninth Ward was underwater. You know, the Superdome was a fucking humanitarian nightmare. People were breaking into abandoned stores because there was no food. No FEMA trucks, no clean water stations, no medics on every single corner, just bodies floating down the street and helicopters circling overhead, filming instead of rescuing. And while the city begged for help, cable news warned suburban viewers of thugs with guns and gang members roaming the streets, snipers targeting aid workers. The claims turned out to be false and wildly exaggerated, but they served the purpose to justify the militarized response instead of a humanitarian one. Instead of aid convoys, armored trucks rode in. National Guard troops with rifles patrolled neighborhoods before all the living had been rescued. People who had just survived a Category 5 hurricane now face the full weight of centuries-old hurricane called American motherfucking racism. This is what happens when America fears its own fucking shadow. For generations, black people have been portrayed as the threat. We've been seen as less than human. That's why enslaved Africans were under slave patrols. That's why black towns from Tulsa to Rosewood were burned down over fucking rumors. And that's why the desperate search for food was recast as a crime spree. Because empathy requires seeing people as equal. And America has always struggled with that. It was fucking predictable. Because in a country where black pain is commodified, criminalized, and then ignored, disaster response becomes just another battlefield in a war that we didn't start. So 5 days. That's how long it took the government to mobilize in full. But it only took 5 seconds for the media to decide who the villains were. You know, you fast forward now to 2025, AI has an insatiable appetite for electricity and is blowing up all of the utility plants. The Department of Energy cited forecasts that now peg data centers at 12% of the U.S. power grid by 2028. That's triple 2022. Bills are rising nationwide, and states scramble just to feed into big tech's loads. The TVA, or the Tennessee Valley Authority, they've been cutting deals to power South Memphis and other sites, and they've greenlighted it to supply a controversial AI data center, despite community warnings about the grid, the strain, the air quality that is predominantly in black neighborhoods. And that is textbook environmental justice risk. You know, you concentrate the burdens and then you disperse the benefits. Even Google just announced it will pause its AI compute at peak demand through demand response agreements with TVA because it understands that the grid is straining. You know, if the tech giants are admitting it, then you know that the residents are feeling it first. You know, this is through higher bills, reliability risks. Tennessee knows industrial harm already. In 2008, the Kingston coal ash disaster poisoned workers and communities. And settlements continued even decades later. And in Memphis, the organizers beat back the Byhalia oil pipeline. This was to protect the city's drinking water aquifer. The people are the power. It is the only thing that has consistently bent this curve. Katrina taught us all of the warning signs that were ignored by the obituaries of the 1965 Hurricane Betsy. And even though that sounded the alarm for, you know, the Flood Control Act that honestly got built halfway, you know, in wrong in all of the crucial places. And New Orleans had all of its wetlands chewed up, you know, and the MRGO funneled the kill shot. You know, FEMA and the White House just so happened to fumble the ball. And then the neighborhoods that drown, they look like us. Today we swapped the levees, you know, for load forecasts and the MRGO for the megawatts. And this pattern is the same: to privatize all of the benefits, socialize the risk, and then aim it at communities already carrying the heaviest load. We cannot wait for the water to rise again. I'll leave you guys with this. If this episode moved you in any type of way, I want you to do one thing. I want you to show up at the utility board meetings or at your city council hearings. And I want you to ask where the power is going, who pays, and what protections neighborhoods are going to get in return. Don't let them call it growth if the bill is your health. This is the Rion Frequency, and this is the come up for the culture. So until the next time, stay royal, stay rooted, and keep that frequency high.
This was the Rion Frequency, where the wealth conversation starts with mindset and ends in legacy. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, rate us 5 stars, drop a review, and help the algorithm find the culture. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, smash the like. The come up is now in session.